channel. Today, we want to talk a little bit about the upcoming gubernatorial election for the state of Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer, who is the current governor, has not declared that she is interested or is running again for a second term, but it is likely that over the next couple of months she will likely throw her hat back into the ring, so to speak, for a second term as Michigan governor. I wanted to start off by showing this map. This is the current sort of outlook, or at least what I perceive as the current outlook for the upcoming 2022 cycle of elections. Right now, I have Michigan leaning Democrat. I guess this is very much dependent on who decides to jump into the race and to what degree that individual is being supported. There are a couple of candidates that I'll touch on in a few minutes, but I think it's important to know one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out is Michigan has always been a fairly blue state, not necessarily safe in the sense of, it's guaranteed that a Democrat will pull off a victory. I think, back in, I think it was the 2010 cycle with the big red wave during the Obama sort of midterm election cycle, Michigan ended up electing a Republican governor. There was a Republican-led legislature at both the House and the state House and the state Senate level, which ended up those individuals marking or drawing districts that really favored the Republican Party. And it is still noticeable today if you look at the sort of lay of the land, so to speak, of the legislature in Michigan, you'll notice that a lot of the districts are drawn in a way that favors the Republican Party. Now, that is likely to change given that Michigan does have an independent sort of council or committee that is handling or taking up the drawing of redistricting in the states. In terms of what to expect, Michigan did see a slight decrease in its population. So taking a look at, the Detroit Free Press, as a result of the reduction in population, Michigan will be losing a congressional seat. It's not yet known what the Michigan 13 congressional district will look like. So it's looking like two congressional districts will be merged into one. And, whoever comes out victorious in that election will, of course, represent that district. So it's still very early to tell. I'll definitely do another video, especially as the independent council, or committee, they get together and they draw up maps. But that is going to be one area worth looking at. And also, I do think that, the political landscape here in Michigan will be slightly more competitive, given that, the drawing of the districts are not in the hands of politicians, but rather are in the hands of the public. So taking a look here at some census information, as you can see, very straightforward. There was a decline in the population in the state. Again, white individuals represent majority of the folks who live in the state, then followed by a 15% or 16% black African descent in the area, and then the numbers sort of trail off from there. So it's going to be very interesting. I think the gubernatorial race will sort of give us a highlight or a snapshot into what districts will vote and how they would vote, how they will vote, and also it will give us a better outcome of how the legislature will shape up moving into the 2022 sort of legislative cycle. Currently, right now, as mentioned before, Governor Gretchen Whitmer is the incumbent governor. She is likely to announce that she is likely to run for re-election for this 2022 cycle. Taking a look right now at some of her approval rating, I will say that prior to the pandemic, she was registering very high on the approval rating. I think maybe close to 58 to 60%. 60% might be a little bit too high, but averaging in the upper 50s. At the start of the pandemic, those numbers have since dropped. This is out of the Detroit News article, in which her approval rating now sort of sits at or around the 50% mark. And that is due in part to her handling of the pandemic, according to the Republicans. There is a start, and I also note that the approval rating is very much partisan. So if you go around the state and you ask folks who live, let's say in, Detroit or Kalamazoo or, some of those heavily populated areas, they'll likely say that she did an amazing job. And also, as a person who lived in Michigan, there's definitely, partisan divide when it comes to whether or not Gretchen Whitmer handled, the pandemic as best as she could. There was a strong period, or at least an extended period, where she shut down the state, and so that, of course, angered a lot of folks. But in terms of where she sits right now, it is at 50%. There is also some news back during the pandemic about the health director leaving. That was shrouded in some secrecy, and she eventually came forward and discussed that the director left with a severance package during the midst of a pandemic. And so, and then of course there were some issues on the western side of the state that she was a part of, in terms of, there's one on the 23rd in which she apologized after photos had emerged of her at a restaurant, violating her own COVID guideline recommendations. And so, largely speaking, her approval ratings reach, I don't think they have gone below 50%, but she is sitting there. But largely speaking, she is still is a very popular governor in the state, despite her handling, or perceived handling, of the pandemic. Taking a look at some of her accomplishments, she does reflect a lot on the 2020 cycle. I think, in terms of what she was able to accomplish, it's still quite unclear. I think COVID and her handling of COVID really kind of overshadowed some of the things that she was working on. She is still, working with the Clean Slate, which is a legislation to reform Michigan's criminal expungement laws. That was something that she is taking much credit for. She also invested some money into the infrastructure. I know one of the big things that she was very much interested in was fixing, quote unquote, the damn roads. She did introduce a $3.5 billion Rebuilding Michigan bond plan. In November, the Michigan Department of Transportation, they ended up completing, a rebuilding project on I-496. And I think I think it's one thing to acknowledge that the roads are still bad here in Michigan. So there's a lot more that she could have done, but she is still committed to fixing and or improving the infrastructure in the state. And then she's also been championing the MI Healthy Climate Plan, which was set to achieve economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050. There are several townships and cities within Michigan that have implemented some form of carbon neutrality agreements. And then, of course, she signed Senate Bill 1251 and 1252, which created the Flint Settlement Trust Fund within the Michigan Department of Treasury to address, some of the funding issues associated with the Flint water crisis. And so those are some key things that she has been able to work on, that she touts as being accomplishments. And obviously, she is also touting her response to the COVID pandemic across the state. In terms of, taking a look at the past elections in Michigan, this was the 2018 race between her and Bill Schuette. I think that's his name. As you can see here, she pulled off a very successful and large victory over her challenger. She ran up, of course, a lot of numbers over in the Detroit Ann Arbor, Flint area, the Grand Rapids area, and some of the parts of the Upper Peninsula. Looking at sort of some of the polling for the 2022 cycle, in order for her to be successful, she is going to have to run up those numbers again. And there might be a slight challenge given that, the pandemic has had an impact on her approval ratings, as well as the 2020 election and the influence of the former president Donald Trump. So talking a little bit about Donald Trump and who he might be sort of backing for the gubernatorial race, there are a couple of Republican candidates who have declared. We have one individual who is an entertainer, who, just likes to say very extreme comments. Some of those individuals who have declared it's still unclear if they're like running for the sake of running or if they are genuinely interested in upseating Gretchen Whitmer. So there is one individual I have here by the name of Garrett Soledano, who is the former co-chairman of Unlock Michigan. He has some ties with the majority leader in the Michigan Senate. I'll come back to him in a few minutes, but he is being supported by, the majority leader in the Michigan Senate. We also have another individual by the name of Tudor Dixon, who is a media personality. She is an individual who is closely aligning herself with former President Donald Trump. She's very active on the western side of the state, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how she does and how she is polling against some of these other candidates. Another individual who have pulled out of the race is a state senator who has pulled out of the race, as well as Candace Miller, who expressed that she is not interested in running, but there's still sort of the possibility that she could be throwing her hat in the ring. Another potential sort of candidate who is garnishing a lot of attention, we have John James. John James, that name should sound familiar, especially for folks who, have been following Michigan politics for a while. I have it highlighted here, but John James is a business owner. He was also a former Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate, both in 2018 as well as 2020. He lost both of those races. So, thinking about, we can probably safely infer that him receiving the nomination might not be ideal for the Republican Party in the state of Michigan, given that he has lost two of those elections. And so, of course, if you lose, a couple of elections, whether or not you'll be able to capture the nominee, in the eyes of, those within your party becomes a little bit bleak. So yes, he is a notable Republican in the state. However, he does bring with him two losses, which is not appealing to the Republican leadership in the state. And then another individual that is garnishing a lot of attention is James Craig, who is the outgoing chief of police in Detroit, I want to say. He is currently in the process of meeting with the Republican leadership in the state and is looking for an opportunity to get into this race. He's going to be a name that I'm going to be looking out for. John Craig has, an extensive history in the city of Detroit. And so him coming into this race or throwing his hat into the arena will definitely provide a little bit of challenge to Gretchen Whitmer as she vied to recapture her seat for a second term. Taking a look at a couple of polling options here, we have taken into consideration Gretchen Whitmer versus James Craig, recognizing that James Craig is sort of like a favorable figure in the state for Republicans, not focusing too much on this Republican-led poll, but it's still up in the air in terms of the margin of error. It has Gretchen Whitmer beating James Craig 48% to 42%, with 10% being undecided. So definitely we'll continue to provide some updates in terms of polling versus Gretchen Whitmer v. James Craig. And then, of course, taking a look at some predictions. I like the nonpartisan group Inside Elections. It does have Michigan as a battleground state. Don't necessarily agree with that too much. I think, given the rhetoric, I think a lot of things has to be taken into consideration for this election. One of those being the influence of President Trump. And there's also been talks of sort of Michigan's Republican legislatures, that the legislature in Michigan sort of taking up some of the recounting of ballots, similar to that of what's happening in Arizona and Maricopa County. That might have an impact on sort of independents and Democrats in the state. So while Inside Elections is ranking this as a battleground state, I do at this moment think that the state of Michigan will likely lean more Democrat than Republican. And I'm also, as I mentioned before at the start, very much interested to see how these districts will align and what the makeup of the House and Senate legislative body will look like for the fall. I'm going to see if I can find some additional information on potential running mates for Gretchen Whitmer, if she's going to continue with her current lieutenant governor, or if she is interested in maybe finding someone else. I'll find that when I get some more information about that. I'll definitely share it. But Michigan's election, gubernatorial election, is shaping up to be very interesting. It will be a lot more, I will say, in line with the Florida gubernatorial election in terms of active movement and garnishing a lot of sort of national interest. And so as we learn a little bit more about candidates throwing their hat in the ring, I'll continue to provide some updates. But other than that, feel free again to like, subscribe, and I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.